As I read today's gospel in both the reading from Genesis and Romans, and reflected upon the state of the world and the church, my attention keeps coming back to the following. In the story of Abraham and Sarah and the three visitors from Genesis, a story which has been understood for 2 millennia by Christians as being an encounter with the Trinity, but which might be better interpreted as a visitation by angels, Abraham and Sarah did not know who they were meeting. They just knew that there were three strangers traveling across the wilderness at high noon who needed help, and they did all they could to help them. It is from this act of unfettered generosity and love, offering food and water to three anonymous figures, that Abraham became the father of the Jewish people and our adopted spiritual father as well. God asks us for love, not all the religious stuff, to provide for one another out of whatever we have to offer, not to build monuments to God or to have technically perfect liturgies. In Romans, Paul reminds the Christians of ancient Rome, men and women living in the midst of the capital of an empire built upon conquest, slavery, oppression, and the worship of the emperor, that they are not deserving of salvation. Rather, God comes into their lives through grace and grace alone. For us today, the message of Paul still rings with truth. We are not perfect. We are human. We make mistakes. We hurt one another and ourselves. But God does not ask us to be perfect to be saved. God asks us to be human with God and to be human with one another. And through being human, being both vulnerable and loving, become like God in this imperfect world. We are called to become like a God who chose to become human and to not just end all suffering and hardship with the snap of his fingers, but rather to show us how to live our lives in the most fully human ways. And in the gospel, Jesus sent the apostles out. They sent them to the Jewish community, to their own people, not to the Gentiles. Jesus sent them out without anything except the shirts on their back. They were supposed to leave their baggage behind. They were called to forget all that had gone before. They were called to put their trust in God. They were called to accept that they may not see their own successes, and in fact, in this lifetime, they would see nothing but suffering, a reality that Matthew and his followers had seen become reality. And when leaving behind an unsuccessful mission, Jesus called upon the apostles to literally shake off the experience and move on. In the time that Matthew was writing, a generation or two removed from when the apostles lived and Jesus spoke, it became clear that despite Jesus sending the apostles to the Jewish people first, that was not where people most needed to hear God's word. The Jewish people already knew God. It was the people who were outside the bounds of God's family who were receptive, who needed to hear from the apostles, to be invited into God's family, to find salvation through Christ. Now, in the gospel, a book written by a man who was feeling rejected and hurt by those from his own family and writing for those who felt similarly, there is a bitterness of this rejection that is put into the mouth of Jesus. It is a bitterness that also reflected the lived reality of the oppression by the Roman Empire, especially by Nero and the martyrdoms of Peter, Paul, and many of the apostles during his reign. But knowing God to be loving, forgiving, and merciful, the idea that Jesus would have said that if people did not readily embrace him, they should be left to burn in the fires of hell seems off. Make it much more likely that Jesus told the apostles to simply shake the dust from their feet and move on, to accept that this was not where their mission lay and let go of their bitterness and go on. They were called upon to find the people who needed to hear Christ's message and were open to it. People who were feeling lost and lonely and cut off. People who, like those three strangers in Genesis, were wandering through the wilderness without food or water. The apostles were called upon to stop trying to cling to that which was not working anymore and move on to become Christ in the world for those who needed Christ's love. Become Christ's hands and feet, become the most fully human versions of themselves. Become the light in the darkest corners of this good but imperfect world. And that is where we, as successors to the apostles, need to be as well. We are not called to uphold that which has gone before, convert those who are already in relationship with God, or to force open doors that are slammed in our faces. We are called, rather, to offer those who are outside those doors comfort, shelter, and sustenance. To on this Father's Day, follow in the footsteps of our father Abraham, and in the ways of our Father in heaven, love people where they are for who they are, offering a love to those who need it, though they may not deserve it, because it has been freely given to us, though we don't deserve it, but we need it as well. Amen.